All right, we are here, the comic binge doing the MCU required reading. It's a late night show. I wanted to stream it just because it's a lot easier for me just to post in general. But I love doing these shows, and then today I'm super, super excited. I get to have a show with two people I very fondly love very much. I am joined today with my good friends Chris and Alex. Chris, how are you doing, sir?
I can't complain without whining. So
That's fair.
things are all right. Thank you. How are you?
I'm a little sick still. I'm a little sick. I lost my voice 2 weeks ago. I got it back somewhat. And then my daughter brought home something else. I got sick again. And now I'm still recovering. So it's been a process. So if you see me go, mute myself and have to sneeze and jump off, just be aware that's gonna happen. And I saved my voice as much as I could today. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, we're also joined by Alex from the Comic Book Historians podcast, YouTube, website. You got all kinds of crazy stuff going on here, man. All kinds.
Well, it's great to be here, Paul. Thanks. And I love
thank
the
you.
sideburns. I love what you're doing with that. And with the hoarse voice, it feels like Sabretooth is the host
Yeah.
of the show today. I love that.
I mean, Lev Shriver's sideburns are legendary. I mean, like he should rock those year round, right? I mean, that's how I feel anyway. So today we are doing MCU required reading for Shang Chi, the Legend of the Ten Rings, the MCU film that just came out, and it's been doing awesome. You can hear my review on the MCU fan show, not the main spoiler podcast. I wasn't on that show, but the show after that. And I'm curious. I know Chris. I watched the movie with Chris, so I know what he thought already. But Alex, I don't know what you think. And Chris, obviously, I'll let you have after Chris or Alex here. But Alex, what were your thoughts on Shang-Chi? And then we'll get into more of like the comic book comparisons after your initial thoughts on the film. But the film itself, what did you think of the movie?
I enjoyed it a lot. I think it's probably the best way you could go with that character and his father and the relationship. Really, and before we get into the comics, the original comics were really based on Bruce Lee and Enter the Dragon from 1973. But what they did with this movie is they really didn't go the Bruce Lee way. They oddly went like toward a Jackie Chan model of like Rumble in the Bronx type of movies where it's almost like comedy action in a way with a sense of destiny too. They have to have that, but it was definitely more of like a Jackie Chan style of Shang-Chi story. So I thought that was an interesting choice, but it made sense to fit the Marvel mold of having comedy with action and stunts and physical entertainment. So it definitely fit the vibe probably better than the Bruce Lee vibe would have. So taking all that into account also, I found myself really liking it a lot more than I expected because I didn't get a Bruce Lee vibe from the commercials. But I loved it. I actually came out really psyched about it. And I thought that turning Fu Manchu into the Mandarin and then turning the rings into something more interesting and throwing that into the storyline. We didn't get Fin Fang Foom, I guess, but we still got something. I enjoyed. I liked it a lot. I enjoyed it from start to finish.
That's awesome. We'll get to Fin Fang Foom in a little bit. as well as so which by the way, we'll get to that in a second. I for the record, Alex, when I told you the required reading for this, you're like, I love that story. I was like, why? We keep finding things. Things.
That's stuff that I grew up on. I love that stuff.
Same here. Yeah. Same here. We'll get to that in a second. Which I'm really excited to talk about. Obviously. Chris, I know what you think about the movie, but and you posted a very elaborate, nice review on your website, I believe. What was your take on Shang-Chi?
I thought it was great. It was probably one of the better MCU movies that's come along. Really outside of Avengers over the last few years. So I was, in a way, I was kind of distracted too much by some of the mythology that the MCU had laid down when it came to their version of the Ten Rings organization. I was wondering how I was too preoccupied, I guess, with how they were going to rationalize what we glimpsed from the trailer, which looked a little closer to more long-standing association that the Mandarin had with the group of renegades that we saw at the beginning of the first Iron Man movie.
Right.
So they kind of built a creative off-ramp from that, which was probably the best way that they could have handled it. And they also, I like how retroactively Shang-Chi, the movie, says a lot about the hubris of Aldrich Killian as we saw him in Iron Man 3, you know, because he just kind of latches on to these stereotypical examples of culture and tried to fashion, like he said, a boogeyman, you know, that was named after an orange. I laughed out loud at that part.
It's true.
So in terms of the mythology stuff, I thought that they did a solid job while also incorporating some of the more substantive things that we had seen, including a rather controversial component of Iron Man 3. If you haven't seen the movie, I don't want to spoil that for you, but you probably know what I'm talking about just in terms of a loose description.
Yeah.
But it was good. It was great. It was a great way to fold that stuff in. And in terms of the character himself, I didn't expect him to be as young as he was, but that's not a knock on it. That's just, I guess it was just kind of a surprising observation. But I'm also at a point in my life where I have to get used to the idea that sometime rather soon, I'm going to be older than a lot of these characters that I've been reading about my entire life.
You already are in some cases. Let's be real.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Oh, yeah. No, yeah, it's true. But I mean,
it's a weird event when that happens.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, when I was in
college,
I'm
used to it a little bit.
Yeah,
because because of sports. Because I love sports. And like football players, you know, I'm like, before I was always younger than they were, and then pretty soon I was the same age, and now I'm way older, and I'm like,
you realize, God, these people are kids.
I had that with John Candy. I guess he died at
at
the age that I am now, and I'm like, what? Okay.
No, I love John Candy. That really bummed me out when that happened.
There's a great YouTube channel, and Hats Off Entertainment. They have a bunch of cool John Candy. You know what the channel I'm talking about, Alex?
Oh, yeah, I think so, because I've watched a lot of John Candy videos. I think it was probably there.
Yeah, his Uncle Buck, like the Lost Uncle Buck movie.
I saw that. I saw.
Yeah, it's great. It's
very
great.
Good.
I love Uncle Buck. It's one of my favorite comedies growing up.
Good.
So word. Yeah, so that's a great.
I tried to watch the show, but it doesn't quite hit the same.
What, the Uncle Buck TV show?
Yeah.
Oh God, awful. Not even close. I mean, come on. Come on. All right. Anyway, we're good.
But anyway, so
So
in terms of the movie and the way that they really, my first major exposure was something that we did a binge episode on the podcast.
Oh yeah.
My first real major exposure to Shang-Chi as a character was when he was a part of the roster of the Secret Avengers with Ed Brubaker. Brubaker, Mike Deodato is a great book. I highly recommend that title, those first 12 issues in particular, to anybody. But that was my
6
first
through 12, right? Or 7 through 12.
Well, he was in the first year, but yeah, that main story that focused on him specifically.
Yeah, okay. You're right. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. That was great. That's really still my favorite Shang-Chi stories, even now after reading all these different comics, which we'll get into that in a minute.
I was telling you the other day, I didn't realize that was actually a pretty big occurrence in his history. You know, it's like he's not been a character that a lot of people have really kind of leaned on in terms of active publication. Like he's shown up, like he was in Hickman's Avengers for a while,
right?
But he hasn't had a monthly title of his own until recently,
right?
Since Master of Kung Fu. So that stuff, you know, my relative lack of familiarity really kind of only enhanced what the movie was doing, because I became more familiar with the history of the character in the last year or so. But the movie really kind of latched onto the idea that this is a canvas that we can play with to incorporate into the MCU.
Oh yeah,
did a phenomenal job.
So yeah, exactly. And I want to second, or you know, basically what all you guys have said. And the thing is, I thought Shang-Chi, in a very quick nutshell, I loved it. And I think I loved it because it really took, I think, a character that, in my opinion, was just okay in the comic books. And we'll get to that in a second here, Alex. I know you're probably have a lot to say about that, but which we will. But I thought they did a phenomenal job of incorporating this deeper mythology and the fantasy element, which I was not expecting, and I freaking loved. I loved it, and there's a lot to be said with that. We'll get into the comic books here in a minute, but at the same time, I thought it was great. It wasn't, I don't think it was perfect, but I do feel it was a very, very good MCU film. One of the better ones, I would say, especially, or I would say, solo adventures, where it's just one hero and it's focused on that one character. But I will also say, I think the biggest weakness of the film is it meanders a little bit in the middle, like a lot of films do, right? But it wasn't bad. It just kind of meanders a little bit. But the beginning and the ending, the beginning of the film is one of the best MCU beginnings of all time. I will put that up against anything. It's phenomenal. And the ending is one of the best third acts, I think, in any MCU film, minus like the major Avengers films. I think the ending was way better than I was anticipating. There's the part where they all are fighting. They have the two factions, and I'm like, this looks like literally 20 people versus 20 people. This does not look interesting at all. And it kind of reminded me a little bit of Black Panther, where like they have the big battle. It doesn't look like a battle at all. It's like feels like 20 people versus 20 people, and it's like, it's not really a big epic. But then it quickly goes from like 10 versus 10 people to like all of a sudden it's them teaming up against these demon things coming at them. I'm like, okay, this is what I'm about. And then it became just craziness from there, and I'm like, I love this. So there was a lot of that going on, which aren't in the comics really, obviously. And like Chris said, my main introduction to Shang-Chi, I should say. I say Shang-Chi, get ridiculed. Shang-Chi, excuse me, was that Secret Avengers comic that we talked about. So, and I love it. I think that's a great introduction to anything for Shang-Chi. So, getting into it, I asked Alex when we were, because I had read the initial Jim Starlin, I think, Steve Englehart issues, which are great, by the way. Those are a great introduction to the character. Jim Starlin's art is so good in that. I thought that was very, like, just, after they left, I was like, I'm out, And then it was you, my friend, and other people, I think, kind of talking about the great runs of whatever. I butcher his name, Paul Giulassi. Is that his name?
Paul Gulacy.
I'm
And I would say that Englehart still stayed around in those first like issue that he was in it, that Gulacy was in it, and Gulacy hadn't quite found his footing yet, but it did have. It's interesting because you can tell it's Englehart versus the celebrated writer after Englehart, which is Doug Mensch, who went for 100 something issues. But Englehart, it's funny. There's a scene. That's the first image I sent you where you have Shang-Chi after some action. He's like coming down. Like there's a reference of him that he was kind of high before, but now he's coming down from a trip almost. And Englehart does the same thing with Doctor Strange, and he also does the same thing with Captain Marvel on a
this one.
That's the movie poster one from later. But there's one with him and Doctor Strange on the bottom, and but that's okay. But basically there's this a reference of like coming down off a trip, that one right there, and it's just so interesting, right? Loosening the mind, and then at the end of that Doctor Strange panel, he sits there for a very long time, coming down, like this is an Englehart LSD reference. So you can tell it's Englehart because Doug Mensch doesn't do stuff like that. But when Gulacy comes in, the art does pick back up, I think. But it really evolves over like him going up to like issue 50. Right. And there was actually a lot of elements I kind of picked up on while I was reading that, and then the Zek run after, which I know you got into. But they go into some of the mythology that is in the movie. Like the movie was actually very mythology accurate, I felt.
Really?
Because although the cause of the immortality was different, and it was Fu Manchu and not the Mandarin, but ultimately Fu Manchu, the Mandarin, even the Yellow Claw character from the 50s and the Steranko Nick Fury run, they're all really the same Yellow Peril characters. So they're not like really coming from the best place, obviously. But when handled right, like they did in this movie, it can do better than what it did before. but there was that role. But Fu Manchu was like almost like a Dracula character, like almost immortal. And then there was this British spy who was old, who came from the old Fu Manchu books, Sir Dennis Nayland Smith, and he was like the Van Helsing of the story. And that was the story structure in the beginning. But I think it was Doug Mensch that almost evolved it more into being a little more like Enter the Dragon, and almost employing the Nick Fury like secret agent element to the thing, infiltrating the enemy base. A lot of the stuff that makes Mortal Kombat great made that series great. And it evolves over time. They almost actually bring in like James Bond elements to get that series interesting. And I think Gulacy really summons his Steranko vibe and really that Steranko, James Bond, Nick Fury vibe to that, and really escalates the story beyond, I think, anything the character was originally intended for. And that's what I think a lot of the older fans were hoping to get from the movie. But that's okay. They got this new updated thing, which I think still has a lot of the elements. I mean, so I think that, his sister, who had her own kind of group that she developed, and her own organization against her father, that's from the comic. That was from that's a Doug Mensch storyline, and they executed that really well in the film. I would say it does miss out on the beautiful fighting kung fu women, although this had that. But in the 70s, it was more exploitative, I guess, where they're wearing thongs and stuff at the same time. But so clearly, like teenagers reading that, they're going to get a different impression. But yeah, that run is amazing. I thought Gulacy's like splash pages, making them like 70s movies posters, was just so incredible. I mean, I love that, because that, if you look at movie posters from that time, and that's Pavan, with the whip there, and what's also interesting is the illustration. You could tell who Gulacy, when he was illustrating faces, he was actually illustrating the faces after different actors. Harder to tell from this picture, but there are other pictures that show it. Maybe not in the ones I've sent you, but Shang-Chi, after a while, basically he had Bruce Lee's face after a while.
Oh yeah, I remember. I've seen it.
And then there there's two like kind of British super agents, and the one on the from my perspective looking at it, the one holding the pistol looking up, he was actually fashioned after he would have Sean Connery's face straight up for like half of the panels he was in throughout Gulacy's penciling. There's this other guy who's not in this scene, and he would have Marlon Brando's face, like Marlon Brando's Streetcar of Desire. He would have that face on that guy. So he was basically utilizing Brando, Bruce Lee, and Sean Connery as like facial homage or swipes. But it added a certain cinema to the Master of Kung Fu series that's really hard to capture. It's not easy to get that sense of cinema. Why don't you show some of those other panels, like the first appearance of Razor Fist, right? I mean, incredible, right? Obviously, the one on the left is like Bruce Lee, right? The physicality and the speed. How do you capture speed with still photos? But he does, because if you look at it, that on the left, that middle panel, he's jumping over a guy, right? And then the next panel, it's a larger panel with a sudden punch, like, because it went from that to that so quickly and the panel widened, there's a sense of like speed, like a Bruce Lee style of speed. That's so hard to do, but from an art standpoint, it's really genius the way he choreographed that. And then Razor Fist, this is the first Razor Fist, so he had two Razor Fists, so someone had to wipe his ass for him. But then the later Razor Fist just had one, like the movie. He's wiping his own ass, I'm sure.
Yeah, for sure. He's only got one Razor Fist.
Yeah, so he could wipe his ass with the
he could
fist,
No, it's just like the three seashells from Demolition Man.
Right.
Yeah, no, hold on.
An appendage from that
now,
one of these arms.
Now, I'm going to say right now, people, that if there's any occupational therapists who are aware, there are definitely ways you can wipe your ass with using different things. So just be aware.
That's a good
Alex,
point. That's a very good point. And it's a very compassionate, sensensitive thing you've just said, and I appreciate it.
And I'm not, it's funny because I've thought about it. I'm like, actually, I used to work in therapy. So yeah, there are definitely things you could attach that would definitely actually be very helpful and actually maybe even better than actual hands, maybe in some cases, I would say.
The days are wonderful.
There you go. That's right.
Days are great.
I'm sure. And I'm pretty sure. But Razor Fist, there's probably some European background to him, I'm sure. So and bidets are plentiful in Europe.
Yes.
But look at, I just love the muscles and the shading, and then Razor Fist just looks incredible, like such a domineering presence. And this is where Gulacy evolves from that last panel to his own illustration style. And this is the stuff that people fell in love with, But yeah, so let's go to the next page. What other pages you got there?
All right, we got I put a couple other things in here too, but I think this is one that this thing. Now, this really quickly, I just want to say, when I was first reading this, Alex, and I don't think you got to this point, Chris, but this, I flipped this over and went, what the hell? And I'm like, this is incredible. Like this, to me, this is what the comic medium is all about. Like right here, like this is beautiful art. Just this is sequential, but it's also like just a beautiful picture. It's just genius. This is pure genius. And it was funny. You posted it on your.
I just want to say real fast. You know how much I freak out about definition through shadow, and this is masterwork right here on these faces.
Oh, I love this. Oh.
Yeah, and it was funny, Alex. You post this on your Facebook group for comic book historians, and I remember I said every time I see this page, these two splash this layout page. It's so a girl like fanning herself, like, oh my god. It's like, yeah, I just see this, and I'm like, whoo. It's just like it's a piece of work, man. This is masterful. Anyway, continue, sir.
I love it, and like look what he does in all of them, or at least most of them, is that it's action. But it's zooming in closer to the figure in question with each one. So there's this passage of time, and then this mutual, like they're all doing different things, but they're all acknowledging like, where the fuck are we now?
Right. Yeah,
what
exactly.
is this place? But I just love what he did, especially with Shang Chi, like that movement. See, this is the Bruce Lee movement. This is, Enter the Dragon, still photography of Bruce Lee in motion, right? And then if you look at the second row, that's the guy that has the Sean Connery face. And then if you look at the fourth row, that's the guy that has the Marlon Brando. See that?
Yeah, I totally see that. That's hilarious.
So there's definitely like reference photo material happening, but it's also, it almost doesn't matter. Like, I mean, even a good fumetti, when organized right, can still be great, but this is illustration. This is artwork. And even though there's photo reference, it's still used in such a way that you can't really you can't really put this into film. Like you can't really make a TV show that has this. This is only comics. That's, I think, another thing that's genius about this is that it's really, you can only do this in a comic. You can only do this in this medium. And that's, and then the mastermind's lair, right? The bad guy's lair. It's underground. There's this weird futuristic place. It's like there's such fantasy and realism just combined into these two pages, like incredible. You rarely see anything like this.
No, this to me is a work of art, and I think only broadens the comic medium, and it shows you what geniuses it is, that you can do with the medium. And that's one thing I think about this run is more what is impressive is more of what it did. I think it shows the medium than it actually does the character, because I got to be honest, reading this again, and I'm not sure how much you've read, Chris. I think you read a little bit. I read the issues that you told me to, the Mensch, and I always call him Monic, by the way. Am I mispronouncing everyone's names? I'm Doug Monic. But I don't know why. That's weird. I'm just a weirdo, I guess. But when I read those issues, I didn't love the James Bond aspect. I am not a James Bond person at all. I mean, spy stuff is anyway, I couldn't connect to that. I didn't know Sir Dennis was an actual Fu Manchu character.
Yeah, from like 1932 or 3 or so. And actually, but he was younger then. And there are some random flashback panels in Master of Kung Fu where you'd see him as a young blonde guy, and his adversary was Fu Manchu, and then now he's old, and Fu Manchu is immortal. So there's definitely a Van Helsing Dracula relationship too.
Right.
But ultimately, you know, he is the British, you know, intelligence, you know, officer type that is kind of telling Shang-Chi about, hey, here's the new info on your evil dad, and you know, now we need to take down this guy, now we need to take down this bad guy. So it definitely has that. Enter the Dragons is that way too. There's British people talking to Bruce Lee, hey, there's you know, Mr. Han on this island, we need you to take him out. You know, it's the same setup, but at the same time, it does go into this James Bond, you know, style of the secret agent game and infiltrating an organization, taking down the secret base, you know, climactic ending, you know, fantastical settings that only an evil mastermind could put together. So, and it was definitely, they were definitely trying to push a movie vibe in Master of Kung Fu. There are even some panels like issue 40, the splash page shows like film reels with people in them, right? And so that's definitely a sense of you know, we're making movies here, people, but they went beyond movies, especially with that one those double page splash you just showed.
Right. And you know, and for me, I'm glad you kind of said that, you know, as you read, it definitely felt more aligned with the movie than you probably were. Maybe, I don't know if you said you remembered or what, but I that's the one thing I would say the movie did a better job of. I love the direction they took the character more than what is known as his more reverenced material. And I think from a story standpoint, I prefer it. Now, from the art, like I think from the medium standpoint, as far as what Jalasi and Mensch were doing, it definitely was way more artistic and really interesting what they were doing. And I can understand. I know there's a lot of hardcore fans. I think we've seen them online. You know, they're older than us, Alex.
Right.
You know,
they say back when Shang Chi was good or something like that.
Yeah, I know. And I'm like, you know, I mean, listen, we all love James Bond. I get it. Like, it's cool, you know. But you know, I don't need Bruce Lee and James Bond teaming up to make Shang-Chi interesting. And
and that's totally fair. I mean, I think for the modern realm, that might be a little tough to sell to a mass audience now.
Yeah, not
because
then,
people would be like, well, this is 70s, right? This isn't very 2021. And so I think by going that more Jackie Chan way of doing it, I think Marvel made a smart choice in applying the very same story concepts, you know, the immortal dad. The only thing I would say is a difference is that Englehart wrote Shang-Chi to be half. His mother was a blonde white woman, and his father was Fu Manchu. So he was actually more like Brandon Lee, really. But then I think after a while, it got better to just draw him more like Bruce Lee, and then just go actually 100% racially. And I think then that turned into a more interesting, pure character for that story. And then I think that's what carried forward. I think that hybrid racial, the biracial part of it kind of went away, it seemed, after a while.
Yeah, I agree. Chris, so how much have you read of this stuff? And again, you read the early stuff, right? That's you read just
a few of them, but it was enough to give me an impression of, what's the right word? I guess depth, you know, artistic depth. Some of the pages that you guys showed really kind of demonstrates to me that the medium by that point had matured to a point that looked rather atypical. You consider a lot of the, I guess, more immortal images that have survived from comics into the current public consciousness that is rather obsessed with the medium in one form or another. But, you know, Shang-Chi doesn't often come up in the conversation, but maybe he should more, because that the clear sequence of events, along with the definition, even, you know, whether there's photo reference or not, if you can transplant that kind of detail onto a comic book page, that is a kind of style that nowadays I associate with someone like Mike Deodato, right? Because Deodato on a regular basis defines his work
that's a great comparison.
by shadow.
Yeah,
I mean, we'll pull up the page of all the faces again next to the reveal of the.
Is this right here?
I don't see it.
Is that it? But I posted it up there. I see it. Do you guys see it?
Oh, there we go. Okay, yeah,
I do see it.
So on the top with Shang-Chi himself, I mean, you might think that that's a Deodato.
Thank you, Marshall.
Drawing nowadays.
Absolutely.
And the commonality of that kind of a style just doesn't seem very persistent, especially during this era, until you get to maybe the early to mid 90s, maybe even the late 90s, early 2000s, right? When there was kind of,
I would say that the 70s, the mid to kind of later 70s, this was the era where graphic novels were coming into fruition. So you had, Howard Chaykin illustrating graphic novels for like heavy metal and stuff, and Heavy Metal magazine, which was Metal Hurlant in France. They were doing stuff like this. So this is when even Will Eisner's, A Contract with God, which isn't illustrated like this, but it is considered, this graphic novel format. This is when, and Steranko's Red Tide, 1976, right? That's 1976, illustrated very similarly. So illustration in a graphic novel format, that Shang-Chi was actually part of that. It's just never really talked about like that, but I think it needs to be. I think it should be talked about that way.
Yeah, and I mean, when you put it in those kinds of terms, it automatically makes me lump that kind of style in with, this is 70s, I guess, Neil Adams, right?
Right,
Neil
for
Adams,
sure.
DC
yeah, and Neil Adams, hugely influential at this time. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because his Superman Muhammad Ali, which was 2 years after, 78, but that's illustration. I mean, that feels like Muhammad Ali's in that comic.
Oh, yeah.
And then Superman feels like a real guy, and that's actually pre-Alex Ross, but that's what Alex Ross does now, is he makes them feel like they're real. Neil Adams was doing that back in the 70s too. So illustration in comics was, a big deal in the 70s for sure.
Well, and one of the things that you want to get across in that style of illustration in general, because when you go back and you read some of the more predominant superhero comics of the 70s with like the top tier heroes, the kind of emotion that was on display just from Shang in that page is not particularly common. I can think of a few other instances, like with Neil Adams, the Adams O'Neill Green Lantern Green Arrow stuff. I mean, those got to be pretty emotional stories, understandably so, but those were also kind of higher profile characters. I mean, at the time they were relatively lower profile characters, but nowadays, I mean, you lump Green Lantern and Green Arrow in with the top tier of the DC universe. And seeing that kind of work being done on Shang-Chi just kind of communicates to me that maybe this is something that kind of flew under the radar in its own time.
I think so. It's almost more of a cult following almost.
Absolutely. It definitely felt like that. Cause I remember when I'd go to comic stores when I was a kid, I would see Shang-Chi comics on walls all the time. And even as a Marvel zombie growing up, self-proclaimed, I never knew who the hell that character was.
Right. He's not really a superhero exactly.
Yeah. But I mean, so is like Punisher. But I mean, you know what I mean? Like, but the thing was,
Punisher has a logo on his chest, right? I mean,
that's true.
Even Iron Fist has a tattoo of a dragon on his chest, right?
That's a good point.
Shang-Chi doesn't have a logo really.
No. Well, he has that little what do you call it on his back? I forgot what it's called. I don't know what it is, but. So I guess for me, for people who want to dive into Shang-Chi comic books, I would say, me personally, for recommending for MCU stuff or where to take the character, I think that if you're going to dive into the original 70s comic books, Alex suggested, I think you said issues 38 through 51, and that's with Mensch and Galassi. With some,
I mean, Galassi starts at like 18, but it's a little sporadic. Then once you get it like the 30s to like 50, that's like golden stuff.
Right. That's and you're right. I definitely enjoyed that. it was spotty a little bit at times for me because I don't like spy stuff. There's a lot of spy stuff in there, so you're expecting like demons and dragons.
It's for sure. I mean, it's almost mostly a spy comic for a lot of it. But the kung fu action and the choreography, you know, like Mike Zeck, for example. Like I loved his, you know, 1981 and on Captain America. I loved his Punisher. You know, Secret Wars. I loved the way he did that. And so I love Mike Zeck, especially his 80s stuff. But it was interesting to look at his art evolve. His art became that over the Master of Kung Fu, because when he started, it was like set 1977. So it was issue 55. And it wasn't like the Zeck that we found love with in the 80s.
No, it was different.
But once he starts, like once Gene Day starts inking him, and now it's like, you know, 1978, late 1978, 1979.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where it's like, that's the Zeck we all, you know, he became that over Master of Kung Fu, and all the demands of the layouts of Kung Fu, the fighting, the sharp action, you know, he brought that to Captain America, right? That's why his Captain America was just so sharp, because it was like, you know, Kung Fu ridden Captain America. I mean, we never saw fight moves like that, you know, for a while before that anyway. So, but then when Gene Day goes on, the illustration that he puts in, you know, Gene Day wasn't much of as much of an action choreographer, but the architecture and what he does with lettering and the bricks and the stairways and almost like Escher-esque, you know, frames of who's in it. It's like incredible to watch. I mean, the guy could have been like a master architect of an alternate reality. He died at, you know, really young, like at 32. Of a heart attack in 1982. He was about to move over to do Batman with Doug Mensch and for DC, and then he just died, you know, in the street of a heart attack. And it's so sad, not even fair, because he was so supremely talented. And people need to look at some of those pages too.
Yeah, so I would say that if you don't expect the movie. And the movie is its own thing. It very much is. And so if you're going into that, you're just kind of getting to an idea of what Shang Chi kind of created the character in the first place, what kind of carried him for 100 issues. And I think what we kind of been touching on a lot is you're going to get more of a greater range of the medium of comic books, which I think is worth reading in of itself, obviously.
Right. Just for that reason. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I put it as required reading. It's just interesting to see. My one criticism, I wanted to bring this up. We brought up these great, you know, splash pages for the first page, you know, but they have the covers like this, and it's just like,
I know. Well,
I'm like,
because the cover, and I totally agree. It's like you're not getting that inside. You're getting something, you know, like you're getting cinema, way better. But you're getting like, you know, Cocoa Puffs commercial on the cover. Like, but no, I mean, you know, those are basically, those are like, you know, cover layouts of Marvel in general at the time. That's basically them maintaining the Marvel brand cover wise, but then internally, you're getting like experimental, amazing.
This is literally the next page. So so basically this is the comic cover. Like, oh, cool, I'm gonna buy this really cool comic. Then it's like, actually, this is the cover. So it felt like Jalasi was like, no, this is my cover, and it's like almost like the Spirit, you know, Sunday paper things. If you know what I'm talking about here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't want to go as far as calling it like a bait and switch, but kind of seems like that's
yeah.
You know, they had a brand to maintain cover wise. I think
that's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah.
The thing that comes to my mind, even when looking at a comparison like that, you know, you compare the stylistic components of an artist like Steve Ditko to Jack Kirby, right? And Kirby has a more generally you know, barrel-chested, boisterous kind of heroic posture for the characters that he renders, whereas Ditko tended to be darker, a little bit, I would say, grittier. I would personally describe it that way.
More gnarled.
Yeah, and maybe even a little bit more stylized, right? And it seems like that same kind of philosophy fed into the initial selling of Amazing Fantasy number 15, right? Because Ditko was overruled as the cover artist with a Kirby cover to try and sell Spider-Man to people. And it worked clearly in that instance, but maybe that set a template. I'm making an assumption.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, I feel. And I don't know if it necessarily set a template, although maybe it did, because that's basically how a lot of the editors in chief ran things. They're like, make it look like Marvel on the cover, But then maybe inside we can go a little house of ideas in there, and maybe that's kind of the idea there.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. So
but I will say I do love the 70s, like Gil Kane, Marvel covers, and and Dave Cockrum and all that stuff. But I will say that cover compared to what's inside does feel like a Hostess commercial.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's so weird. So if you're wondering what the comics to read for Shang-Chi, again, I'm gonna go with what Alex told me. It basically issues 38 through 51. That's mentioned Jalasi. Jalasi bails out, I think, after 50 it's around 50.
Yeah, like 51 or so. Yeah.
Yeah. And then
there's a few fill-in issues, and there's some cool stuff with like Keith Pollard and whoever, but then Zek though takes it to a next level after that.
Yeah, for sure. And I need to read more of the Zek stuff. I dabble a little bit. So
yeah, I mean, you should just surf through the pages. They are so much fun, and his growth as an artist, it is incredible. And actually, what turned out was he ended up doing layouts, and Gene Day was doing a lot of the penciling toward some of the end of that. But it's still pretty awesome.
Yeah. So for me, we're going to wrap up that Shang-Chi stuff, into a story that, for a lot of people like myself, as we're watching the mid-credit scene, spoilers, if you haven't seen Shang-Chi yet, which you haven't, I don't know why you're watching this then, but you've been warned. The mid-credit scene is obviously the change, or not change, but Wong is talking to Shang-Chi and Katie, and he says the rings are radiating a beacon and they're calling to something. And I was sitting there thinking, what in the hell are these rings calling to, or calling home, or whatever, right? And I just was like, I'm like, obviously it's based in the Mandarin somehow. I mean, it's very much where it's tied into, but what is it? And I'll never forget, Chris, I broadcasted on MCU Fan Show last week how you had mentioned, like, what if it's like the power cosmic? What if it's an ex-herald? I'm like, dude, I love that. I freaking love that. But it's funny because I knew that the rings were tied with aliens and things like that, and again, I'm avoiding spoilers for all these stories because I want people to read the comics. I want people to go and read these stories because they're so much fun. And I remember reading a little bit about what the rings are. And I'm like, oh yeah, there's the alien races. I forgot, Alex, what exactly those aliens were. And I was like, oh crap. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. And I remembered that as a kid, I read a bunch of those comics as a kid. I didn't put it all together. Now, so I bought this the other day, and I can't believe it came here before I even the actual graphic novel.
Yeah.
Dragon Seed. How rad is this? So this is the comics, the graphic novel, which you don't need to buy this. It's on Marvel Unlimited, obviously. This is Iron Man 270 to 275. And I'll show you the comic that I grew up reading and read over and over again. It was my introduction to Mr. Fing Fing Foom. So anyway, when I was a kid, my brother and I would go to Tom Thumb grocery in Lake Stevens. If Chris Pratt, if you're watching, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And yeah, you suck. Anyway, just kidding.
If you're watching.
No, he doesn't give a crap about me. Alex, you don't know, me and Chris went to high school together for 1 year.
You and Chris Pratt did?
Yeah, he went to my high school.
That's cool.
No, it's not cool. But anyway, I always say that just because it's so weird. Small, quick story. So there was a guy I graduated with that we were very loosely, knew each other, but we were friends on Facebook. This is right before he became Chris got the Guardians role. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I did not want anything to do with. I didn't care about Chris Pratt. I'd see my high school chums, be like, "Oh, Chris Pratt is all in Parks and Rec." I'm like, I don't give a crap. And then I knew that this guy I was friends with on Facebook, he was good friends with him. In fact, I think he moved down to California and was like, they were whatever. And I just heard things, and I know I'm not one to pry. I don't do that crap. That's just, I don't care. But when I heard he was up for Star-Lord and he got it, I messaged him and I said, I heard you talk to Chris Pratt. Tell him don't screw up Star-Lord, excuse me. And because I liked Star-Lord a lot from the Annihilation Wave. I didn't know him that well before because I was too young. He was in the 70s. He disappeared. And he came back. But I loved that character that and Lanning did. And I said, don't tell him don't screw it up. He kind of, I think he laughed or something, and then he unfriended me immediately, and then he disappeared from
Chris
me.
Pratt?
No, the guy I messaged.
Oh.
So he obviously, I touched on something. So anyway, that's my Chris Pratt story.
There you go.
So maybe Chris heard it. I doubt he and praise thought I was an idiot, and I think he's an idiot. So anyway, but he's great in Guardians Volume 1. Okay. Guardians Volume 1. I will give him all the credit in the world. He was great in that movie. Yeah. Volume 1.
I will say though, you should check out, if you haven't, before Andy the landing in Abnett, Star-Lord. It was the team getting together in the Keith Geffen run.
Oh yeah,
they're all breaking out of jail and stuff, and they that's really what
Captain Universe
pace for all those guys, including Groot. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, because
also to Chris's point with Mike Deodato doing similar things, you're right. Like he would make Norman Osborn look like Tommy Lee Jones, right?
Yeah.
So very similar to what Gulacy was doing. So that's true.
Yeah.
Which always weirds me out because I always hear Willem Dafoe's voice in my head whenever Norman Osborn. Yeah.
Well, I just remember that horrible run where Norman Osborn went to Paris with Gwen Stacy.
All right. We don't want to talk about that. You
see Tommy Lee Jones's face.
All right. Oh, okay. We don't.
Okay.
Since past got retconned, we don't talk about that. So anyway,
did it?
Some grocery in Lake City. We'll talk later. So anyway, my brother, I think it was my older brother, he picked up this comic, and it's this one right here, Iron Man 271, and I remember being like, who the heck is Fing Fang Foom? And I naturally inherited this comic. I think I just took it and read it a bunch. This comic, I grew up reading the crap out of. And it is just an amazing comic. I just want you guys to read this comic because look at this thing. Yeah. Look how amazing this is. This is Paul Ryan. And that guy is underrated. This is phenomenal, man.
Yeah, I like Paul Ryan. I like his Fantastic Four and his Flash. Yeah.
Me too. So this right here was my introduction to Fing Fang Foom. Now, in the Dragon Seed series, you're going to find out what Fing Fang Foom is tied with the 10 rings.
Right.
All that stuff is all combined into it. And I have to tell you, I had read people, being like, spoiler alert, or not spoiler alert, but they go, explain, the 10 rings explained, and this or that, or whatever, right? This comic book, reading the Dragon Seed run, made me go, okay, I think this is exactly where they're going with it, because I forgot or hadn't read all the whole saga. I didn't know some of the reveals in there. I went, oh crap, that's actually pretty cool. And it definitely is in line with the third act of, I think, traditional, or in the thematically anyway, visually, of the third act of Shang Chi, the movie. So it kind of all adds up a little. I'm like, actually, it makes a lot of sense. So
they actually made dragons like feasible, which is kind of interesting.
Exactly.
Like,
so
how they do that?
I was really impressed. So I think the Dragon Seed is what right now what those rings are bringing to. And I don't think the Mandarin is dead in the movie Wenwu. I don't think he's dead. I think he's still alive somehow, or he'll figure something will happen. And I think there's going to be something like that in the Dragon Seed, which is all about with Iron Man, as we all know, because Iron Man's awesome. And this is a really fun series. What's crazy to me is that John Byrne wrote it. I always forget John Byrne wrote this.
Right. He was a writer too.
Really, yeah. And it's really cool because he was like the third billing. If you look at it, it would be Paul Ryan, the inker, and then John Byrne, the writer.
Right.
Really cool stuff. I thought that was really, really kind of commendable on him. I know John Byrne's not exactly the most well-liked and not the nicest guy in the world, but I thought it was very commendable.
Right. Like he's not known for humility, I don't think, but he's definitely very good. He knows how to tell a comic book story. That's for sure.
Oh, absolutely. So I'll go with you first, Chris. You read this, you kind of not knowing anything really about this story at all. What was your take going into it?
Well, I was reminded at how John Byrne's writing style has a very attractive kind of poetry to it, which I don't think he really showed off all that much on the work of his that I've absorbed the most, which is unsurprising to you, of course, is Superman. his Superman stuff felt weirdly way more grounded than a story about a regular guy in a mechanical costume, which is kind of interesting to me. But it seems like he was trying, at least in this instance, to apply a degree of grandeur to the proceedings, and I think that he did a pretty good job. He wanted this to try and feel understandably epic, considering the scales that slowly started to become revealed over the course of the story. And it got into
no pun intended, right? No the scales.
right.
Wow.
Yeah. Nice.
Wow.
That was good. I walked right into that one. I walked right into it. But no, it was really interesting in the way that it kind of started. I like how referential it was to current events of the time. Like, obviously, Tony, especially in this time, was really defined by his overriding capitalism, right? And this was not too long after the terrible debacle that happened in Tiananmen Square, and that was kind of held up by Tony as a symbol of everything wrong with the communist Chinese regime. And so both he and Rhodey are really, really uncomfortable being in this place. And that notwithstanding, like that's just one of the reasons that they're uncomfortable. But that was referred to a few times. And I always, as a political science kid, I always appreciate when current events can be weaved into my fantastical stories.
Right. That is cool.
Yeah. So that's always fun. But I also appreciate that the whole tone of the story changes once Fin Fang Foom gets involved, and obviously once we start to realize more about where he came from and what the origins of the Ten Rings are in this instance. So kind of humble beginnings for the Ten Rings, all things considered. And the final confrontation is inspired. I will say that.
Yeah.
It's always fun to see instances where the hero is forced to team up in some form or fashion with their arch nemesis. I always get a kick out of those kinds of instances. There aren't a whole lot of instances of Batman teaming up with the Joker. There's a few more of Superman teaming up with Lex Luthor. I can't think of any off the top of my head, though I'm sure that some happened between Captain America and the Red Skull. But seeing Iron Man and the Mandarin have to combine their powers in this instance, and really Iron Man serving as an amplifier for the rings was an inspired choice, and I appreciated that. But it also just had a really solid look to it. You know, the action was really cleanly detailed. I wonder, and I have no idea. I should probably research this a little bit more, but I wonder if Byrne might have been involved on the layout side, because there seemed to be some commonality in the way that I've noticed he has liked to lay out certain stories when he's trying to hit a certain beat. But that's just an assumption on my part. I have no idea if that's the case or not, but I mean, maybe. But either way, the really clean pencils, the colors pop pretty vibrantly, but that's kind of to be expected for this period, right? They all kind of dealt in primary shades, and that's kind of something that modern comics have gotten away from in a lot of cases. But in this instance, it's always kind of fun to revisit when that was the predominant style of the time. But in terms of the actual origin of the rings themselves, it's probably for the best that they didn't choose to, at least not at the outset, choose to adapt this in the MCU. It doesn't mean that they can't at some point, or that they'll put their own spin on it. But it was fun to see, because Fin Fang Foom, all things considered, is not a character that I have willfully exposed myself to that much.
Sure, yeah.
So yeah, this story hit a lot of novelties for me, I guess.
Right. So, and really quickly, so I think that this story very much could be not verbatim, but I think it'll be heavily drawn from in the sequel or whatever they want to do with Shang Chi. I really do think so, because it leaves door open for where the rings come from. I wouldn't be surprised it could be an Avengers film or something like that, or not an Avengers film, but something like that.
I see where you're coming from, but the thing that I guess I go to more is just like, this is a chance, instead of being like the focus of a Shang-Chi sequel, maybe this is a good way to cross-pollinate. We know that Riri Williams is getting her own show. I don't think that there would be necessarily any restriction on someone like Shang Chi showing up on a Disney Plus show. It would be a kind of a way to more directly adapt the story, even without the presence of Tony Stark.
Right. Well,
because Rhodey's in the mix, and
right. Well, well, I guess what I'm saying is, I don't think what I think is basically what the main crux of the story is. Essentially, I'm talking about just the rings themselves, where they come from, where they lead into. I think that is all what they're going to encompass into it, because I think now you have a way to bring in the Fing Fang Foom and monsters and dragons and things like that, and where they originate from, which is from, whatever, right? So I mean,
well, it's funny that you mentioned that, though, because in a way, one of the brilliant strokes of this story, at least for my money, is the idea of latching the more mystical components that the Mandarin brings in with the broader sci-fi stuff that you would expect from a Marvel U story, right?
Right.
And they kind of did that in the movie too, to an extent. But I always love when these kinds of cosmic, more ethereal sources of mysticism are explained by some sci-fi principle, usually like aliens, right? I mean, they turn Thor into an alien effectively,
right?
But it works
in some way.
And the Rainbow Bridge was a wormhole, basically.
Right? Yeah, it's a form of technology that is beyond our comprehension.
Right.
Right. It's not just.
And even Doctor Strange. I mean, they had to have those metallic things, whatever those are.
Don't even get me started on magic. Don't even get me started on that. Don't even get me started on that.
But they did that, right? And so there's almost an artifactual source.
We're talking about more MCU stuff right now, but honestly, like, one of the things that kind of bugs me, even though it worked really well in the Infinity Saga leading up to Endgame, I don't know if I really like the idea of a Marvel universe that doesn't have the Eye of Agamotto or the Cosmic Cube. I tying those to the stones, like, it works. It got them to the place that they needed it to be.
I see your point, but to me, it was always a good sacrifice to make it have some umph to it. But that's just me.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, I'm not saying it's wrong. Like, it clearly worked, right? So,
but I just wanted to say that I think that's what I think they're going to take from is basically the origin, and I think you have a way for when Wu to come back in some ways, and also incorporate him and maybe team up with the Sun, because of what this could happen. What's really fascinating, and Alex, you might know better than me because you're a comic book historian and you know way more than me. And I mean, I'm not trying to be funny. I'm being serious.
Okay.
I was researching this and I was curious because that was my introduction to Fing Fang Foom.
Yeah.
I think I had heard about him here or there, but when I researched it, I'm like, oh, how many appearances has Fing Fang Foom been in between? Where did he show up before this? I want to say he hadn't showed up for like 20 years, 30 years.
Right.
Before that.
Well, that's kind of like how Groot was, because before the superheroes took over, from 59 to I don't know, 62-ish, they were still doing mostly monster comics. And so they had all these wacky names. Stan or whoever was coming up with these wonky names, and Kirby would kind of say, let's have this guy, let's have this monster. He just kept drawing monsters, and then Stan would give him these weird funky names. So like Groot, Fin Fang Foom, Zom, Zemnu. Like, he just kind of kept coming up with all this, and they were all almost like joke characters. Now they were like one-off things that were just for that month, just to fill that 6-7 page that they needed for that one thing. So when you see some of these characters come back, it's basically by writers like John Byrne or whoever who read that stuff when in the 60s when they were kids, and they want to bring them into the mainstream Marvel universe. That's what happened with Groot. He was not meant to be any superhero character, but bringing in these random characters from the monster comics that they used to do before they found Fantastic Four and all the characters leading up to Avengers, that starts becoming a thing where they bring those characters into the movies, usually by people who were fan of those early 60s stuff because they were kids reading it, and now they're writing this stuff and they want to bring those characters back and add more backstory.
Yeah, so it was just funny to me because I'm like, oh man, like Fing Fing Foom, like John Byrne, like reinvigorated or reinvigorated. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. I can't.
Reinvigorated, is that what
He
you mean?
reinvigorated, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that's what Keith Geffen did with Groot, right? I mean,
Groot. Yeah.
It's the interesting thing though is who gets credit for that? It's usually not Byrne or Geffen.
No.
It's more Stan Lee, Larry Lieber, Jack Kirby because they created the character.
Yeah.
And there's a funny differentiation between who created it and then who actually made them cool and relevant, right? That's like a whole nother name. And that person doesn't really get a creator credit, which is odd.
What does that call to a Batman fan's mind? I wonder. Bob Kane, Bill Finger.
Oh wow! All right.
Finger interjected, before Batman's first appearance, so that's a co-creation, which is weird, but
it took way too long for him to be officially recognized as
horrible
such.
story, and in a very unjust.
But at the same time, too, the application though isn't too far off because on the DC side, if you you can say, okay, who created the Flash, but because there have been permutations of the Flash and the dividing line between the golden and silver ages, which one is more culturally relevant, which one has gone on to become. And the version of Batman that is predominant today, who was that really created by? Was that created by Kane and Finger, or was that created by Adams and O'Neill, or was it created by Frank
all
Miller
that
and David Mazzucchelli? I mean, there's and every one of these characters is prone to comparisons. Like
and that's how Wolverine is, right? His creators are not the people who made him cool, right? It was people after those guys,
right?
So
I guess for me, I think it's really cool because this is basically like Fing Fang Foom's appearance, like first appearance, essentially.
Right. And you're saying as far as in the Marvel universe, mainstream 616 universe,
and I think that is a great way to introduce, I think, monsters into the mainstream MCU, and that's why I think this is an important story. That you kind of introduce this idea, and I just love the idea of where monsters could come from, and like I said, and where these rings could come from, and what that could mean, and what that could lead to.
Lots of interesting. I mean, maybe this could be the beginning of some monster movie age of Marvel in a way, because they have plenty of kaiju to choose from, right? There's plenty of kaiju there.
So I think for me that this is an important story. I think if you want to know where they could lead, where the rings could lead, I'm not saying they will. They've already taken liberties with the character, obviously, of Shang Chi, and for the best, honestly, it's maybe the best, iterations as far as diving away from the material. Is I'm of the firm belief that the comics have endured for so long for a reason, because the stories are good, and the medium has stayed around this long because the characters are great, and the characters are great because the comics have come out for so long and they make the characters great. So it's kind of like they need each other, and I think the reason the stories are so good is that because they're worth telling. These stories are worth telling. I think this is no different. So I think that this the Dragon Seed Saga is an underrated story. Don't read a Wikipedia article, because I'll gotta be honest, I had fully forgot a lot of that stuff. And when I read the Wikipedia article, it sounded kind of stupid, to be quite honest. Oh, this is what it is? Okay, whatever. And then I read the Dragon Seed Saga and I went, I totally forgot. This is freaking awesome. I'm like, this is exactly what they need to do. I'm like, so don't read a Wikipedia article. Just read the comics, man. The comics are so good. So good.
Yeah,
so,
it's the execution that matters.
Absolutely. And what's also really quickly, if you want to get the whole even more bigger story of the Mandarin and Fing Fing Foom and that whole thing, the issues before that were John Byrne and John Romita Jr. And man, there is a page, and I don't know if I have it here. Maybe I did. I put it up here. I'm not sure, but there is a page. I didn't. But anyway, there is a splash page of John Romita Jr. drawing Fing Fang Foom, sleeping. It is. Yeah. I posted on my Twitter a long time ago. It is incredible.
Yeah, it leaves an impression.
Oh God, it made me go, oh yeah, I forgot. They led with this. So yeah, I definitely recommend. It's Iron Man. If you're on Marvel Unlimited, it's Iron Man 270 to 275. It's fantastic. Read it. You're going to be above, ahead of everybody else who wants to know about Mandarin, what it could be. You can read about Fing Fang Foom. It's awesome. So you grew up on this, you said, Alex, you can't read the story?
Oh yeah. I used to go to A1 Comics and buy those. I love that stuff. This was it was basically anything from 87 to like 96. I was just buying as much, like $20 every month, and I would just buy as many of those as I could, and they were only like $1 back then each. So
yeah, when comics were reasonable, right? But no, it's funny because you talked about Paul Ryan and how I didn't know he did Flash. I might have to go check that Flash stuff out. I love Paul Ryan.
He did a Flash run, which I read actually later because I loved his Fantastic Four run that he did with Tom DeFalco.
Yeah,
and I just always liked Paul Ryan stuff. He did some Phantom newspaper comic strip work as well.
Yeah, you're right. He did. I remember hearing it.
And that's more recent. But yeah, he did Flash in the 90s. And it's a fun run. The one thing about
who was the writer?
What was that?
Who was the writer?
Who was the writer? Oh, I don't recall. I don't remember. I was really just reading it for the Paul Ryan stuff.
I mean, I don't blame you. It's funny, really quick, because I want to cover on the comic binge sometime. I think people love the rag on the DeFalco Paul Ryan run, because that was like the precursor to the Heroes Reborn and all that stuff, and people say like all the sales went down, and they had the boob window with Invisible Girl, and but there was a story reason for that. I mean, there was a legitimate like reason of her doing these weird things that were unlike Sue, which you'll get in later if you read the comic books that John Byrne ironically created, with a malice. But anyway, the thing is, I think that DeFalco Paul Ryan run is so underrated. It's ridiculous. I mean, anything DeFalco does, I think, is underrated. But
I love DeFalco stuff. I read pretty much everything he's done.
Yeah,
one of my favorite things he did was, I think it was 79. I think it was a Marvel 2-in-1 with the Thing, and him and Sandman are drinking at the bar.
Yeah, bar. Yeah, they have a drink.
Like they fight and they're drinking together. It's so good.
So rad. There's a great he has an early issue of Marvel Team Up with him and with Spider-Man and Machine Man, and it's really bonkers. Sandman's ironically in it too, but it's bonkers. But it's really well written. I was just like, man, this is actually a really good, like compact 22-page comic book. It's like really impressive what he can do. He did a lot of interesting stuff character-wise, I thought, with the characters of of Fantastic Four, and I think Human Torch. He brought in a lot of, I think, emotional maturity with Johnny, to be honest. I mean, he divorced him, basically divorced him, and then like big things, he went nuts a little bit. Not like,
you mean as far as like Alicia being a Skrull and all that?
Yeah, but also he went all Nova in the city, and and that was interesting. And him and Spider-Man had it out because Spider-Man was worried about him. Like, again, there's repercussions to what why he did a certain thing. So DeFalco is underrated, but Paul Ryan, he just is so good, so good. And can't recommend that run enough. I know people will say like, "Oh, it's not very good." It's way better than people give it.
And the whole '90s. Boob thing, like they had those Marvel swimsuit issues. And, if you looked at like just movies at the time, everything was like that in the 90s. It wasn't just comics. It was like, that was the culture of the 90s. You could watch
Baywatch,
Cinemax,
right?
And it's like, 1 a.m. on Cinemax. God. What was on,
Oh, trust me. Like, I was aware it was on Cinemax at 1 a.m. Trust me.
For a while in the comic shop I worked at, we had a pinup of Steve Rogers in his skimpy bathing suit. Just because it's classic. So
there are some pictures though in those swimsuit issues that are funny, and they have like ads in them that are like fake ads that are really funny. I mean, there's actually a lot of comedy in them. There's one where I forgot who are all four people on it, but there's like, a couple of bad guys in swimsuits, and they're like falling over, like they're tripping over each other. And then like, I don't know, it's Black Panther, and I forgot, I don't know if it's Daredevil or someone, but they're like, there's like a blow up doll that they're like, like pulling at, or it's like, what's going on here? And
Wow.
but it's just funny. But the fake advertisements are perfect. Like, y'all should go back and look at the advertisements that they made for those. They are so funny.
Yeah. So,
but the blow up doll picture, like, you really are like, what is going on?
Great point about the 90s. That was a very interesting time.
It was just all over the place. It wasn't just comics. They were just, you know, they were following the trend. I don't know.
I mean, I think there was some element to that, but there was a story element for it, and I want people to know about that.
And I'm sure, you know, there's a good reason for the boob window. That's fine.
There's also, I think it's 375 that when they all have the guns, and everyone's like, oh, it's very 90s. And I'm like, yeah, but I kind of liked it. And not only that, but like they only had guns for like one issue. It wasn't like it was, you know, for, you know, a whole year. It was
are you talking? Okay, that's different though than the Walt Simonson run, right? Because there was a Walt Simonson one where they had something like that too, and it was very like a gun-driven cover. But you're not talking about that cover. You're talking about another cover.
No. Okay. It's like 275 or 375 or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, where it's like a holographic cover, and it's Sue Storm on the cover, and she has a big old gun. And actually, a pretty cool cover, to be honest. I think it's a cool cover. But honestly,
when I was a teenager and I saw those holographic covers, I thought they were fun. You know, I was like, I want to get one.
Me too. Yeah. I mean, they're ridiculous, but I mean, I love them too at the same time, right? I mean, excuse me. So wrapping up, So I think Shang Chi, Masters of Kung Fu, issues 38 through 51. Not going to give you the heart of what the movie gives you, but it's a good, amazing, I think, testimony of what the medium of comic books can do. And then Iron Man issues 270 through 275. Great issues, fantastic stuff. Go check those out. But anyway, Alex, thank you so much for coming on, man. Always,
I had a great time. Thanks for having me on.
For sure. I selfishly want to have you on every MCU required reading video because you have vast knowledge, and so I'm hoping for when What If is done, I can grab you. We can talk about our favorite What If issues. So,
there you go. Little Roy Thomas action.
We'll talk about that on the show.
Okay.
About that. Anyway, but I love What If. I have a lot of favorite What If issues. My love of What If comes from the 90s. The late night or the early 90s stuff. So that's my wheelhouse for
yeah. I love that What If too. I started with that. I ended up reading the back issues later.
Right. So hopefully when What If is officially done, we'll do a required reading for our favorite What If issues, and that'll be a blast, I think. So
sure.
So I'm asking you on the spot, which whatever. But yeah, anyway, I hope they get you on for that eventually. So and Chris, I know you got some things down the pike. You're not announcing yet, but hopefully we'll be announcing soon at some point. But Chris, thank you for always being my co-host on whenever you can. Always appreciate it.
Happy to be here for you, my friend.
Yes, always. Well, you're not just not just joining me as far as like a guest. You're a co-host. You're part of this.
And I'm glad to be a part of it.
Yes, thank you. So anyway, I should have said this outright. Like the video. Subscribe, all that crap. I'm so bad about it. I never say it at the beginning, but who cares, right? But if you haven't already, if you've made it this long, which most people don't, that's fine. Go and like it. And again, I appreciate everyone who watches the videos all the way to the end, and also people who subscribe and like the videos. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much. So, Alex, where can people find you have a lot of ventures, man. Comic Historians is like it's a brand.
Comic
it's a
Book
brand,
Historians. If you search that, you'll find me. But the YouTube channel, I put all my new videos and interviews there, and then anything that I'm actively reading, I'll make remarks about it on Twitter or the Facebook page, Facebook group as well, which is more of a communal effort, and then the Instagram also. I'll throw some stuff up there as well sometimes.
Yeah, and it's cool because you have like bigwigs like Tom Brevoort commenting or posting stuff on there, and I mean like that ain't nothing to sneeze at. And Brevoort's a big name in comic books, so the dude is he's posted on your thing on a regular basis. I always see like Tom Brevoort. I'm like, Tom Brevoort did like some. Oh no, he's posted in Comic Historians group that I'm a part of. I'm like, okay.
But yeah, he's a nice fellow too.
He's awesome.
I love your
I watched it
actually,
and I watched every minute of it too. By the way,
did you? That's cool.
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
And what's interesting about Tom is that although he's an executive editor and vice president, but he was there since like the end of Jim Shooter's run, like 85, 86.
He wrote
so
Fantastic
he's actually
Force.
like a Marvel historian. Like he was there first person. He was there through the bankruptcy. Like he was giving us first person information on like 30 years of Marvel. It's pretty cool that he's actually there. He was like Uatu during a lot of that.
Well, I don't know if you heard me, but we talked about the DeFalco Paul Ryan run. Well, he wrote the spin-off comic Fantastic Force with Franklin Richards.
That's right. That's cool.
Which I thought I put it up here in my spinner rack somewhere. I want to read that. I've always liked that stuff. But anyway, follow Alex's, all his endeavors. They're awesome. His YouTube is phenomenal. And I've been telling him your videos are just getting better and better.
That's nice. Thanks. I really appreciate that.
No, seriously, they're the one about Miss Fury is awesome.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
The one about the horror analogy or comparison.
The horror movies, from the 30s, and how a lot of comic characters come from it.
That is a must watch for any comic book fan. Must watch.
Oh, nice, thanks.
Must watch. And I'm not just saying that. I laughed my butt off when you're eating your popcorn in that video. Oh my god, I'm like Alex, you're killing me here. But as always, really appreciate your friendship and you coming on and on late night. You're a busy guy, so thank you so
Paul.
much.
No, I appreciate it. I enjoyed being here. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Chris. Where can people find you, my friend?
At Chris Clow on Twitter, CHRISCLOW. We also have started back up our Star Trek podcast, Discovery Debrief, since the animated Lower Decks is on the air. And they just announced a whole bunch of stuff with the official Star Trek Day earlier this month. So a lot of cool stuff to look forward to. I'm looking forward to Strange New Worlds most personally, which is awesome. Ahura is going to be back. I didn't think we'd ever see her.
Oh, really? That's cool. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah, she's a cadet on Captain Pike's Enterprise. So
wow.
That's pretty cool.
Blowing Alex's mind right now.
Yeah.
Blowing his mind.
No, it's TOS is my personal favorite of those shows. So the fact that we're getting more Captain Pike adventures, I've wanted to see that literally my entire life. So
I love that. I followed the first 2 seasons of Discovery, so I like the whole Captain Pike deal. So I'm glad we're getting more of that in Spock in that pre-Kirk era, because there was so little of that.
No,
did you? So the old show. Did you see when it was Kirk talking about Pike? And he's like, "Oh, we're gonna go see Pike at this place," and then they see Pike. It's like this machine with his head, and it's like wobbling all over the place.
The only two-parter. Oh yeah, the Menagerie. That's the only two-parter in the show's existence, and it's really a clip show because the original pilot, The Cage, had never aired. Right. So they were running short on money when they were shooting the first season.
Yes.
So they decided to take that show,
have some flashbacks,
chop it up into pieces and sandwich it in between a couple of things and turn it into 2 episodes. And it actually ended up being really good.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of parts in that second season of Discovery that directly call back to stuff you learned there.
Right.
And
exactly.
It just makes the tragedy of Pike.
It does. It's this impending horrible thing. And the funny thing is, he kept like almost dying in Discovery. I was like, this guy can't catch a break.
He's like Star Trek Steve Rogers in a lot of ways, because it's like when you see him in the original series and he's in that wheelchair and he can't even speak and can only communicate through beeps. It's like, wow, he's terrible fate had befallen this guy. But he throws himself on the grenades all the time. Like, he's pushing people out of the way at danger. He's going first when he probably shouldn't be, and like he puts himself in harm's way if he thinks he's going to be able to save someone.
Something's bound to happen to this guy.
Right.
And as we know, it absolutely did, but thankfully he gets a happy ending. So
the funny thing is, for technology that is so advanced, for him to end up the way he is in that thing, and just sad, right? It's like, wow, what a horrible thing happened to his body.
Especially like one of the cool things, like Discovery really emphasizes.
All right. Let's get this show on the road.
Paul is anti.
Well, it's an hour. It's a comic podcast, and we're at the tail end. So we guys talk about it after the show.
All right.
All right. Sorry. Anyway. thanks for again. Follow me on Twitter at Herman22 with 2 N's, aka P Thug. Follow Comic Historians. That's your channel, Alex. The Comic Binge podcast or YouTube channel on Twitter at Binge Comic. Also on Instagram and TikTok. If you look around, you'll see the logo. You'll follow it. And thank you again for watching the video. And Chris, can you take us out, please?
Read more comics.
Yes. Read more comics. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Bye-bye.